this leads me to my last series of questions, which is the emergence of these political forces would be the ones that would sort of lead to the possible transition to what you call a big green state. So let's get to that to finish it, not to finish in just scary things. So if as you believe the only way to address both the climate crisis and ever-growing inequalities is to break with what remains of the neoliberal pronouncement that are still very much there in the Wall Street consensus about fiscal policies, about the welfare state, about monetary policies, and the connection between the two. Well, the question is how to envision that transition both practically and politically. So we go back to what we touched on a little while ago, is the way to go to denounce the very logic of de-risking, like public goods should not be treated as investable assets, right? Or should that logic of de-risking be appropriated? Like if you really want to mobilize private capital in order to decarbonize or even build infrastructure, then, well, use the proper sticks alongside the carrots. That would be like the first question. Where do you start in terms of, I would say, your political discourse in a way?
Yeah, so my work on the big green state comes from a gradual and I would say to some extent painful realization that the de-risking as a regime of decarbonization was always bound to fail. It was bound to fail in the sense that to be transformative de-risking is very hard to achieve without stoking a kind of greater de-democratization and a greater threat to the political order that liberal capitalism has put in place. So it doesn't work in distributional terms because of the privatization of public goods that comes with a discourse of investability. It doesn't work on its own terms because surrendering the pace of decarbonization to private capital is a bet. It's a risky bet that can't deliver at the scale and on the scale and at the pace that is necessary. It's also a risky geopolitical bet because I would say one way to think about the macro-financial aspects of the great power competition that we are seeing between at least China and the United States is a de-risking regime that fails during the Biden administration against a kind of big green state regime in China. So thinking about the first two, the economic and distributional inefficiencies or fault lines of de-risking led me to start to think about a return to big government under a green umbrella. And and I've worked with Ben Brown on this, and I'm continuing to think about it because my first objection as an economist, but also as a child of central planning, is that a big green state sounds. Let's say that the social forces are aligned that somehow we get a big green state, and I'll come back to the question of is this ever going to happen, or are we kind of dreaming the impossible as Che Guevara instructed us to do every now and then. But even if we get there, even if the social forces are arranged, we manage to roll back the power of financial capital. There are political coalitions and political pressure on governments to embark on these projects. To me, a big green state is a necessary return to a form of planning and a much larger footprint of the state in the economy. So that's already a demand that is complex because it doesn't only require green planners who are competent and can do planning, but it also requires us to contemplate questions of democracy and questions of power dynamics within there. So this is an unfinished kind of project, and I continue to think about it. And we use in this work with Ben Brown, we use the example of China as a country or a political system that mostly or is closest, although very far away from what we would imagine is a democratic big green state, but it takes some steps towards a relationship between state and private capital, where the state is in the driving seat and can dictate, can engineer large economic transformation that is consistent with decarbonization aims, because there are very many losers in decarbonization politics, not just your regular consumers, not just the middle class, but we are talking about the losers in factions of capital, particularly carbon capital, that are very resistant. And I'm bracketing here the case of fossil fuel producers and oil exporters, because that's a very different political economy, and there the Wall Street consensus has either doesn't work in this, or doesn't work at all, or it's not commending the political imaginary, or it's there in a very different form. But in liberal democracies that don't rely on fossil fuels as their main kind of economic activity, inflicting losses on capital is necessary as a part of a decarbonization project. And either you inflict losses in a disorderly way, and with Isabel Weber we worked on this possibility as carbon shock therapy, and you could say Germany had a form of carbon shock therapy because it allowed high energy prices to generate to accelerate the industrialization of certain sectors of manufacturing sectors of the German economy. Or you can have an orderly decarbonization, and that orderly decarbonization requires planning. And the more I think about it, the more that planning becomes more extensive and becomes almost more and more centralized. So yes, I know central planning I grew up under it. It has many possibilities and points of failure, but it's also now, I think, if we are serious about the climate crisis, and almost nobody is at the moment in the political elites, but if we were to take it very seriously, then centralized planning is necessary in order to radically shift resources across sectors, and to radically prepare economies to adapt, not economies and sectors and households for a future of more intense climate crisis. So I didn't answer your very important question, is how do we get there? I started with the problems. I don't know. I think it's a hard question, because getting there would require commanding political energies the political energies of 2018, 2019, when lots of young people were out in the street and they were trying to get governments, with Greta Thunberg, to get governments to engage in radical transformation. Commanding those political energies sounds almost impossible today, generating and commanding them. So maybe the alternative is war economies, in which the war economy gradually becomes a climate war economy, but it starts as a war economy in which the government basically says, okay, as in any war economy, I need capital to do these things for me in order for me to achieve particular objectives. I'm just hoping it doesn't include a proper war and loss of life, but that's how I think about it now.
But the thing with, just to continue on this, the thing with war economy can take different forms. I mean, the Putin war economy is not the same as the Roosevelt war economy, right? So if it's true that when you are in a still somewhat functioning liberal democracy, war economies sometimes can sort of produce more democracy, if only because for the sacrifice that you ask people, you have to give rights in exchange. So that was part of the deal, of the New Deal, basically. With all its limitation, but nonetheless, okay. So that's a possibility. But if you don't go through the war economy and you try to get to the big green state in a different way, then we go back to the problem that you mentioned, is how to keep it democratic, because there seem to be not only one, but three problems. The problem of authoritarianism, that very often comes with planning. The problem of cronyism, which was endemic in a lot of developmental regimes. And then the problem of self-defeating incrementalism, which has been the story of social democracies. So you have to basically try to avoid these three pitfalls to have planning and democracy.
Yes, I would say that the ideal transition to me, if the politics would be, we could get the politics right, the ideal transition towards a big green state is one in which there is sufficient political will to nationalize pension funds, because these are the largest source of funding for big finance, and they ground and they feed the power of big finance in ways that I find quite paradoxical, because it's ultimately, this was supposed to be workers' capital that would help democratize, we always try to democratize capitalism, we always end up with more concentrated forms of it. And in parallel to nationalizing pension funds, it would be important to roll back one important plank of the Wall Street consensus, which is the privatization of the social contract. So in a sense, restoring a sort of maybe not Keynesian ideal, but restoring a Beveridge idea of a social contract with citizens that includes the provision of public goods would make a war economy more palatable if citizens recognize, or a war economy setting more palatable if citizens recognize that there are benefits to them from that kind of a radical transformation, that it's not only attacking the pensioners by nationalizing pension funds, but it's restoring a set of public goods that were the basis for collectively organizing through economic life through the state in the first place. How do you deal with the problems of cronyism? How do you deal with the problems of inefficiency? Well, nobody says that a big green state is an ideal political form. I don't think that these exist, and all the problems that you described characterize very well any form of capitalism I can think of. How do we? It would require, and I have colleagues who work on what they call democratic planning. Which is a more decentralized form that creates some sort of safeguards or guardrails against the fault lines or the problems that you describe. I'm still having trouble imagining how this democratic planning would work, because it seems to me that it would involve forms of deliberation that are susceptible to the same kind of power politics as other forms of world making and policy making, but we have to think through these problems as problems that occur in the process of radical transformation. So I'm not saying they are insignificant. I'm just saying they are part of political life one way or another, and it's not impossible to think a way through them.
Great. Well, just to finish, first of all, it seems that we started with Minsky and we're coming back to Minsky at the very end. So that's a nice full circle. And then just one remark that has been haunting me for like several decades, which is this little enigmatic sentence of Michel Foucault, saying that the left may have a theory of the state and a theory of social movements, but has no theory of government. And I think we're still in that predicament to a certain extent.
Yes. Well, we're trying to get out of it.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.